It began with the fall of an entire star system in less than 3 hours, a destruction so sudden, so complete, so merciless that even the oldest empires of the galaxy went silent in fear as they watched the stars die one by one. The sovereigns arrived without warning, no message, no negotiation, no demand, just a silent wave of dark ships drifting into orbit like an eclipse swallowing light. Their first strike shattered the outer planetary defense grid with almost casual grace, beams of dark energy slicing through fortresses that had stood for centuries. The second strike cracked the nearest moon in half, sending flaming shards spiraling toward the nearest world. The third strike vaporized an entire fleet, hundreds of ships, into glittering dust, as if they were nothing more than grains of sand brushed off a table. Civilians screamed. Pilots begged for orders. Leaders froze. No one had ever seen weapons like these. No one had ever watched planets burn this fast. The sovereigns called themselves the rightful rulers of the universe, the chosen species born to dominate existence, and after wiping out thousands of civilizations across hundreds of galaxies, they believed their own myth completely. They thought they were invincible. They thought nothing could challenge them. Their ships consumed suns for fuel, leaving dying, empty stars behind like cold skeletons hanging in the void. Their armies marched across worlds like storms of living metal, crushing cities, devouring armies, breaking entire civilizations without even slowing down. Wherever they passed, the galaxy whispered the same words: unstoppable, unbeatable, inevitable. Yet their massive, undefeatable conquest paused, not because of resistance, not because of a weapon, not because of an opposing fleet, but because they reached the edge of a quiet, unremarkable region nobody cared about. Human space. A cluster of small colonies, ordinary planets, a few scattered outposts, and one blue world called Earth, a world the sovereigns mocked as primitive, weak, and soft. The sovereigns broadcast the same announcement they always did: surrender or die. But they did not receive a reply. Not a word. Not a threat. Not even a frightened scream. Just silence. Silence that unnerved them, irritated them, crawled under their metallic skin like an itch they couldn't scratch. So the sovereign flagship moved closer, scanning every moon, every asteroid, every pocket of space, and found nothing worth their attention. Until something moved behind a dark, dead moon orbiting an isolated planet. At first the sovereigns thought their scanners were malfunctioning because the object rising from behind the moon looked too old, too worn, too strange to be a threat. It wasn't sleek or shining like their ships. It wasn't decorated with banners or glowing weapons. It looked ancient, like a relic from a forgotten war. A human warship. A ship so still, so silent, so cold that the sovereign commander laughed when he saw it on the screen and said, "Is this their defense? A museum piece?" His officers laughed too. For thousands of years, no species had dared send a single ship against them. But the laughter died instantly when the scanners calibrated and revealed the full picture. The human ship, Raven 01, was enormous. Far larger than any sovereign vessel. Its armor was layered so thick that their scans couldn't see through it. Its engines were dark, silent, cold, not because it was dead, but because it was waiting. And something about the ship, some shape, some pattern in its design, some silent presence radiating from it made the sovereigns feel something they had never felt before. Fear. A slow, cold fear that spread through every officer on the bridge, making their hands shake and their hearts pound. The sovereign commander tried to dismiss the tension, claiming it was just unknown technology making the scans glitch. But no one believed him, not even he believed himself. The human ship didn't turn away. It didn't hide. It didn't call for help. It simply watched them, its black hull absorbing all light like a predator opening its eyes after a long sleep. And then it moved. Slowly, silently, powerfully. It rose from behind the moon with a grace that didn't match its size, drifting forward like a giant waking from centuries of deep rest. The sovereigns panicked the moment it moved. Dozens of warnings flashed across their screens. Energy readings too high, armor too dense, internal power signatures unfamiliar and impossible to analyze. Fire, the sovereign commander ordered, his voice cracking. A barrage of dark lances shot toward Raven 01, slicing through space in straight lines of death. But the beams bent. They curved around the ship like liquid light sliding around an invisible shield, bending and twisting as if the human ship wasn't just protected, it was untouchable. The Sovereign crew stared in confusion, disbelief, horror. How is it doing that? One officer whispered. No one had an answer. Human space had always been quiet. Too quiet. They always stayed away from major conflicts. They never joined the great alliances. They never rose to galactic power. Everyone assumed they were weak. Everyone assumed their silence meant fear. But they didn't understand the truth. Humans weren't silent because they were weak. They were silent because they were watching, learning, preparing. The Sovereign commander tried to regain control, shouting for a second strike, a third strike, a full broadside attack. But every weapon failed, bending or fading or slipping around the human ship like it was wrapped in something the galaxy had never seen before. A barrier of unknown origin. A shield older than their empire. A force that didn't obey the laws of physics. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Sovereigns were afraid. The human warship continued moving forward, slow, steady, unstoppable, as if the universe itself parted around it. And then something happened that froze the blood of every Sovereign on every ship. Their scanners detected a signature inside the human vessel, an activation signal. A heartbeat of energy so old and so powerful that their systems couldn't interpret it. It was like watching a star wake up inside metal. Whatever slept inside that ship was awake now. The Sovereigns launched their entire first wave, hundreds of ships, firing thousands of blasts at once. The void lit up like a storm of fire. But Raven 01 did not slow. It did not shake. It did not even flicker. Instead, a single quiet pulse of white energy rippled across its hull, like a giant breathing out for the first time in ages. The shockwave hit the Sovereign fleet instantly. Ships were thrown sideways. Shields cracked. Systems exploded. Commanders screamed. The Sovereigns had never experienced fear. They had never experienced defeat. They had never been stopped. Until now. The human commander finally opened communication, not with a threat, not with panic, but with a calm, soft voice that carried no emotion at all. This is Terran Vessel Raven 01. Turn away from human space. The Sovereigns stared at the screen, speechless, trembling, unable to comprehend the quiet power of the voice. And then the ship continued moving toward them. Not fleeing. Not negotiating. Coming straight for them. Slowly. Silently. Fearlessly. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. And the Sovereigns, conquerors of thousands of worlds, destroyers of countless civilizations, felt something they had never felt since the birth of their empire. The cold, crushing certainty that they were not the strongest force in the universe, that a single human warship had stopped them. The Sovereigns watched in stunned silence as Raven 01 drifted closer, its massive black hull swallowing starlight like it was made of living shadow. And although the human ship made no threatening movement, every Sovereign instinct screamed in terror, every system warning flashed red. Every officer felt a weight pressing on their chest as if the void itself was whispering. You made a mistake, but their pride refused to let them step back. The Sovereign commander slammed his fist on the console, pretending he wasn't shaking, pretending he wasn't sweating under his armor, barking at his officers. Prepare the second barrage. They dare insult us with one ship? We will obliterate them. Yet even as he yelled, his voice trembled, because deep down he felt something he had never known in thousands of years. He felt small. Their fleet, an armada strong enough to erase galaxies, suddenly looked fragile compared to the silent giant approaching them. As the Sovereigns scrambled to prepare their next assault, Raven 01 continued forward with an unnatural calm, moving like a predator that didn't need to run because it already knew how the hunt would end. Inside the human ship, there was no panic, no shouting, no noise. Officers stood cold, focused, silent, operating controls with steady hands. They weren't rushing, they were preparing, each movement precise, each order spoken softly like a whisper before a storm. For centuries, humanity had hidden their true strength, letting the galaxy believe they were gentle, slow, harmless. But Raven 01 was proof of a history humanity never spoke of, a war they never recorded in public archives, a weapon built in an age where Earth fought nightmares far worse than the Sovereigns. The crew didn't brag about it. They didn't boast. They simply activated systems with a cold, emotionless discipline. Meanwhile, the Sovereign flagship began flashing with panic lights as every scan of the human ship returned the same impossible results. Unknown armor, unknown shield type, unknown energy source, unknown weapon signatures, and the more they scanned it, the more the fear grew. One young Sovereign officer whispered shakily, "Commander, the ship, its design, it isn't like anything in the modern galaxy. It looks old." Another added in a trembling voice, "Older than our empire, older than most species." The commander snarled at them to shut up, but his eyes betrayed the same fear clawing through his own mind. He turned back to the screen and watched the human vessel drift into full view. Its hull covered in faded markings, ancient Terran sigils, long-forgotten emblems that belonged to a civilization that once faced extinction and built weapons not to win, but to survive. And then something happened that froze the Sovereign's blood. The human ship powered its engines. A single pulse. A single breath. A single ignition of white-blue light that shook the void. The energy signature was so powerful, so pure, so ancient that it triggered emergency shutdowns across the Sovereign fleet. Lights dimmed. Shields flickered. Weapon systems crashed. Officers screamed as consoles exploded and smoke filled the command halls. It was as if Raven 01 didn't just activate its engine. It woke up. The Sovereigns desperately tried to restabilize their systems, but the darkness outside seemed to thicken as they realized they were facing something they were never prepared to fight. A human relic from an age when humanity didn't just defend themselves, they hunted monsters. Their fear turned into full panic when a Sovereign frigate drifted too close to Raven 01. It wasn't attacked. It wasn't destroyed by a weapon. It simply stopped. Its engines shut off. Its lights went out. The ship turned cold, dead, lifeless, like Raven 01 drained not its power, but its will. Inside the Sovereign flagship, silence choked the air. Officers stared at the screen with wide, terrified eyes. The commander stepped back, whispering in disbelief, What kind of ship is this?" A trembling voice answered from behind him, "Something we should not have provoked." Raven 01 continued forward. Silent, unbothered, unstoppable. And then, for the first time since the day they conquered their very first galaxy, the Sovereigns took an involuntary step backward. Their pride cracked. Their arrogance shattered. Their confidence collapsed, because for the first time, the predators of the universe realized they were the prey as Raven 01 drifted deeper into the Sovereign war circle. Its engines glowing with an ancient white fire that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat older than any star. Fear began crawling through the alien armada like a living poison. Slow, suffocating, unavoidable. And every Sovereign officer felt it like icy fingers sliding down their spine, twisting their confidence into dread. They had conquered galaxies, destroyed civilizations, burned entire sectors simply for sport. Yet all that glory felt meaningless as they stared at the silent Terran warship that moved without hesitation, without fear, without even acknowledging their presence as a threat. Inside the Sovereign flagship, tensions rose like wildfire. Officers argued, some trembling, some sweating, some clutching their throats as if the very sight of the human vessel made it hard to breathe. "Why won't it respond to our scans?" one shouted. "Why do our weapons fail?" another cried. "Why does it feel like it's watching us?" whispered a third, voice cracking. But the commander said nothing. He simply stared at the image of Raven 01 on the screen. Large, motionless, staring back with a coldness that felt almost human. That made the fear worse. Because humans didn't build ships like this. Humans weren't supposed to have technology like this. Humans were supposed to be weak. So weak that the Sovereigns didn't even consider them worth enslaving. Yet here they were, watching one human ship stand against an empire of thousands. And the silence inside that ship was heavier than any threat. It was a silence that said, "You don't know what we can do." Raven 01 glided forward, turning slightly so the Sovereigns could see the faded markings carved into its ancient armor. Markings none of their translators could interpret. Some symbols looked like warnings. Some looked like battle scars. Some looked like something else entirely. Something alive. The hull absorbed every Sovereign scan. swallowing the signals like a black hole. A creeping terror spread as the sovereign scientists realized something horrifying. The ship wasn't scanning them back. It didn't need to. It already knew. And then, for the first time, the human vessel made a sound. A deep, slow rumble echoed through space like a giant taking its first breath after centuries of sleep. The vibration shook the sovereign fleet, rattling their hulls, making their decks tremble as if the universe itself shifted around them. Officers grabbed control panels to keep from falling. Lights flickered. Some ships lost power entirely. A young sovereign officer gasped, "Commander, the ship's energy signature, it's rising. It's rising fast." Fear swept through the bridge like a freezing wind. The readings on the screens spiked higher and higher, surpassing everything the sovereigns had recorded in their long history. It wasn't just strong, it was impossible. "Nothing can generate this kind of power," the science officer whispered, voice cracking. "Nothing alive, nothing built. This is not normal technology." The commander tried to deny it, but deep inside his core, he knew the truth. This wasn't a ship built for battle. This was a ship built for war. Real war. Ancient war. A war that happened long before the sovereigns existed. A war humanity never spoke about, never wrote about, never bragged about. A war that forced them to create something the galaxy was never meant to see again. And for the first time ever, the sovereigns regretted mocking Earth. Regretted approaching human space. Regretted believing silence meant weakness. Because the silence was finally breaking. The rumbling grew louder, deeper, vibrating the space around them like a storm made of pure power. The sovereign flagship shuddered as if pushed by an invisible hand, alarms screaming across every deck. The commander's voice broke as he shouted, "Stabilize the shields." Officers scrambled, but their hands shook too much to hit the right controls. Some shields flickered entirely out. Some weapons froze mid-cycle. Some engines stalled in panic. Raven 01's rumbling reached its peak, a slow, thunderous exhale that shook the void. And then, its eyes opened. Two long strips of white light ignited across the front of the ship, cold, bright, merciless, and the moment they activated, every sovereign officer felt their chest tighten as if a giant hand squeezed their hearts. It wasn't just a light. It was a warning. A message written in pure energy. You should not have come here. The sovereigns, conquerors of galaxies, destroyers of millions, the most feared empire in the universe, felt something unimaginable. They felt outmatched, outpowered, overwhelmed, and for the first time in their long, merciless history, they felt small. The moment Raven 01's white eyes lit up across its ancient hull, the sovereign armada felt a pressure in the void so immense and cold that even their hardened warriors shook as if the temperature inside their armor dropped below freezing, and before any of them could process what was happening, the human ship made its very first movement of intent. It tilted slightly forward, aligning its nose directly at the sovereign flagship like a predator lowering its head before the kill, and that tiny, controlled motion carried more threat than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. The sovereign commander felt his throat tighten as every sensor on the bridge screamed warnings. Unknown energy surge, unknown system activation, unknown weapon ignition. Yet none of their computers could identify the source because the energy leaking from Raven 01 was not like plasma, not like antimatter, not like quantum fire. It was older, deeper, colder, something that didn't belong in any modern galaxy. Officers stumbled back from their stations as the hulls of nearby sovereign cruisers warped, twisted slightly, as if space itself was bending around the human vessel, and one terrified crew member whispered shakily, "It's not a warship, it's a grave." No one understood what he meant, but everyone felt it. This was not a ship built to scare enemies. It was built to bury them. Then it happened. Raven 01 released a pulse, a slow, soft, single breath of energy that rippled across the void like a wave of white fog rolling outward, silent and graceful. And the sovereigns didn't even realize what it was until their ships began failing in perfect synchrony. Engines sputtered. Shields flickered. Weapon cores cracked. Lights dimmed. Entire battleships went dark like candles being blown out by an invisible hand. The sovereign commander screamed for his engineers to stabilize the systems, but they were already panicking, their fingers trembling too hard to type, sweat dripping down their faces as they watched system after system collapse under a force that didn't even register on their sensors. Meanwhile, inside Raven 01, the human crew worked in complete silence. Not a single wasted word, not a single moment of fear, as if they had trained their entire lives for this exact moment. The captain, a calm woman with silver eyes, simply lifted her hand and spoke in a soft voice, "Mark target 1." Her officers complied instantly. No shouting, no chaos, just perfect focus. And the sovereigns felt something impossible. The human ship was not scared of them. The human ship was disappointed in them. As if they were beneath its effort. As if they were nothing but dust caught in a storm far older and far larger than they could imagine. The sovereign commander's heart hammered violently as he watched Raven 01's ancient core fully awaken. White cracks of light crawling across its hull like veins of a waking titan. Each pulse stronger than the last until even the stars behind it flickered from the energy distortion. "Fire everything," he screamed in pure desperation, and hundreds of sovereign ships launched a synchronized blast, dark beams, gravity lances, planet-killer energy shells, lighting up the void like a sun exploding. The attacks hit Raven 01 directly, and disappeared. No sound, no impact, no explosion. As if the weapons were swallowed whole by a force the universe wasn't designed to understand. A deep, crushing silence fell. The sovereign commander felt his knees weaken as he whispered, What are humans?" Raven 01 finally responded, not with weapons, but with a sound, a long, slow metallic growl that vibrated across the void, a low thunder that made every sovereign officer's bones shake. The ship wasn't just activating systems. It was waking up its memories. The sovereigns had made the worst mistake in their empire's history. They had awakened something humanity swore never to use again. And then the human captain spoke again, her voice cold and quiet, "Raven 01, engage suppression mode." The ship obeyed. White lines along its hull ignited like ancient runes waking from centuries of sleep, and the sovereigns, those proud, cruel conquerors, felt something they had never felt in their long reign. They felt hunted. The moment Raven 01 activated suppression mode, the void around the sovereign armada changed completely, as if the very fabric of space remembered something terrifying and recoiled in fear. The stars dimming, the airless silence thickening until every sovereign officer felt like they were trapped inside a nightmare they could not wake from. The white runes across the human ship's hull pulsed like a heartbeat that belonged to something ancient, something alive, something far older and far stronger than any empire. And each pulse sent a shockwave of distortion rippling through the fleets, bending starlight, warping distance, twisting gravity until sovereign ships began drifting out of formation like helpless toys. Panic consumed their command bridges. "We can't control the ship," one shouted. "Gravity is collapsing," screamed another. "The hull, it's cracking," cried a third as fissures of glowing energy appeared along the metal walls. The sovereign commander tried to stabilize his voice, but it shook uncontrollably as he ordered full retreat, only to hear the most horrifying words in the history of their empire. "Retreat engines offline, something is holding us." Every sovereign heart turned to ice. Raven 01 wasn't attacking them. It was grabbing them, pulling them, pinning them in place like insects trapped under a giant's finger. The sovereign flagship lurched violently as invisible force fields wrapped around its hull, squeezing it with cold precision. Officers fell to the floor, gripping railings, gasping as they felt the crushing pressure close around them. And through all the chaos, Raven 01 drifted closer. Slowly, silently, its white eyes glowing brighter with each second, reflecting off the broken surfaces of the captured ships like the gaze of something that had already judged them guilty. Inside the human ship, the crew remained calm, but their faces were cold with a seriousness deeper than fear. They weren't fighting for glory. They weren't fighting for revenge. They were fighting because humanity had learned long ago what empires like the sovereigns truly were. Predators who only understood force. The human captain stepped forward, her voice steady as she whispered, "Target fleet core formation." Her officers responded instantly, and Raven 01 shifted its angle with terrifying precision, now facing the very center of the sovereign armada, the heart of their power. Horror spread across the sovereign flagship as their sensors detected a new energy surge building inside the human vessel. Weapon signature unknown, expanding, expanding, expanding. The Sovereign Commander stared in disbelief as his screens flickered, showing a swirling vortex of white energy forming at the front of the human ship, rotating slowly like a miniature star being born inside metal. Impossible, he whispered, but the word fell apart on his tongue as the vortex stabilized, humming with a soft melody that should have been beautiful, but instead felt like a funeral song for entire civilizations. The sovereigns begged their ship to move, begged their systems to activate, begged their engines to ignite, but nothing obeyed. Raven 01 had already taken control. The vortex expanded again, and the pressure in the void grew so heavy that sovereign warships began creaking under the strain, their hulls bending inward like soft clay. Officers screamed as cracks spread along their floors, sparks erupting from shattered panels, alarms echoing like dying cries. And then the vortex fired. A single beam. A single whisper of white fire. It moved silently, without recoil, without sound, without shockwave, just a line of ancient energy slicing through the darkness like a blade forged by the universe itself. It touched the first sovereign dreadnought. And the ship evaporated. Not exploded. Not shattered. It simply dissolved into white dust, drifting apart like grains of sand in a breeze. The sovereigns watched in paralyzed terror as the beam passed through ship after ship after ship, carving a straight line through their proud armada like it was slicing through mist. Entire battle groups vanished in seconds. Huge warships disintegrated as if made of smoke. Officers screamed. Commanders cried. The sovereign commander's knees buckled as he whispered, This cannot be real. Nothing can do this, nothing." But Raven 01 continued moving forward, and the beam continued cutting, leaving only silence behind. The galaxy's greatest conquerors, who never bowed, never begged, never feared, finally broke. One sovereign officer collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering, "We can't win. We never could." Another trembled, voice cracking as he said, "Humans hid this. Why did they hide this?" The commander stared at the human warship, voice trembling as he whispered the only truth that mattered, because they never wanted war. The vortex dimmed slowly as Raven 01 powered down its beam, but the fear did not fade. It grew, heavier, deeper, suffocating, as the sovereigns realized the human ship had fired a weapon capable of erasing their entire empire, and it hadn't even used full power. The sovereigns were conquerors. Now they were prey. And Raven 01 wasn't done. It lifted its nose again, runes glowing hotter, energy building deeper, preparing for the next strike. The galaxy's strongest empire was seconds away from learning what humanity was truly capable of. The sovereigns had never known fear, never known hesitation, never known the feeling of standing before something they could not conquer, until the moment Raven 01 began to glow again, brighter than before, its ancient runes blazing like molten stars awakening from eternal sleep and the airless void. Around the human warship twisted with raw power so intense that even distant planets felt the shift in gravity, their atmospheres trembling as if the universe itself held its breath. The battered remnants of the sovereign armada floated helplessly, cracked hulls sparking, dark engines flickering like dying lanterns, officers crying out in terror as their screens filled with warnings they couldn't understand. Warnings about dimensional instability, temporal fractures, energy levels exceeding the laws of physics, things no empire should ever witness. Inside the sovereign flagship, the commander staggered backward as his bridge lights flickered violently, casting sharp shadows across the terrified faces of his officers, some praying, some frozen, some whispering the same hopeless truth. "We cannot survive this, we cannot survive them." Because the human ship wasn't just attacking, it was waking up further, unfolding deeper layers of its ancient systems like a creature shedding its skin before revealing its true form. And humanity, silent for centuries, calm for centuries, had finally decided to fight. Raven 01's surface shifted with a low roar, panels sliding open along its sides to reveal swirling wells of white energy that pulsed like living hearts, each one beating in perfect time, each beat sending another ripple of distortion across the galaxy. Every sovereign ship within range groaned under the weight of that pulse, their hulls warping as invisible claws squeezed their structures tighter and tighter. Some ships simply split in half without sound, their remains drifting like dust. Others imploded in slow, agonizing silence as their cores collapsed. But the worst terror came not from destruction. It came from the sound. For the first time since its activation, Raven 01 emitted a deep, echoing hum, low, ancient, resonant, like the moan of a forgotten god rising from a grave carved before time existed. The hum vibrated through the void, into metal, into bone, into the very minds of every sovereign within its reach, filling their heads with memories that were not theirs. Flashes of ancient wars fought in distant galaxies long before any modern species existed. Images of colossal beasts made of shadows tearing through civilizations. Images of human warships like Raven 01 standing alone against impossible cosmic threats, built not for conquest but survival. And as the sovereigns witnessed those visions, visions of humanity fighting monsters far greater than the sovereigns themselves, the truth shattered what little pride they had left. They had not discovered a human ship. They had awakened a Terran relic built during the War of the Void, a war so old that even the stars had forgotten it. The commander fell to his knees, shaking violently as tears streamed down his metallic cheeks. We challenged that," he whispered, voice breaking apart as he watched Raven 01's power cores crack open, revealing swirling white fire not made of plasma or fusion, but something deeper, dimensional energy harvested from the collapse of dying universes. The runes along the hull glowed hotter, brighter, faster, and the sovereigns felt a crushing realization settling in their hearts. Raven 01 had not used even 1% of its power yet. And then, it finally aimed at them. The ship turned, its massive body rotating smoothly, slowly, terrifyingly, lining up with the last cluster of sovereign warships still barely functional. The sovereign officers screamed for escape, slammed their fists on consoles, begged engines to ignite, begged shields to rise. But Raven 01 had already taken control of space around them. Their ships floated like insects trapped in amber. And inside the human warship, the captain stood with her hands folded behind her back, face calm but eyes burning with an intensity that could cut through steel as she whispered, "Engage Judgment Protocol." The words hit the sovereigns like a death sentence. The glowing wells of white energy around Raven 01 spun faster, fusing into a single colossal sphere of pale fire that formed at the ship's center, swirling with the memories of the ancient Terran war. The sovereign commander whispered brokenly, "No, please, we surrender. Please, please." But the universe didn't hear him. Raven 01 fired. No beam. No explosion. Just light. A wave of pure white light that spread outward like a slow-motion sunrise, touching the sovereign ships one by one, and erasing them from existence instantly. Not destroying. Not burning. Erasing. Removing them from reality like they had never existed. Their screams vanished mid-cry, their ships vanished mid-breaking, their energy signatures vanished mid-recording. The sovereign empire, proud, cruel, unstoppable, was simply gone. And in the silence that followed, as the white light faded and the void slowly returned to its normal shape, the remnants of the galaxy watched in stunned horror. One human warship, just one, had ended a galactic empire that dominated thousands of stars. And it had done so without a scratch, without a struggle, without mercy. The sovereigns had always believed they were the top of the universe. They learned too late that humanity had simply chosen not to fight for a very long time. Raven 01 powered down gently, its runes fading to a soft glow, its engines dimming like a giant returning to sleep after stretching its limbs. Humanity had sent a message without speaking a single word. Don't mistake silence for weakness. Don't mistake peace for fear. And never threaten the earth. The white light faded slowly, leaving behind a graveyard of silence so deep that even the stars seemed afraid to shine, and the empty space where the sovereign armada once floated now looked like a scar across the universe, a dark wound burned into existence by the ancient power of Raven 01. Inside the few surviving observation ships hiding far beyond the battlefield, other alien species watched the aftermath with trembling hands and pounding hearts, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. An empire that ruled countless galaxies, an empire that had crushed civilizations without effort, an empire that believed itself immortal, erased in moments by a single Terran warship. Inside Raven 01's bridge, the human crew stood in a heavy, painful silence, not celebrating, not smiling, not proud, their eyes lowered as the last fragments of the sovereign dust drifted past their screens. Because unlike the aliens watching in horror, Humanity knew what their weapon had cost them long ago, and their captain felt that old weight settle on her shoulders again like a ghost that never left. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, "We never wanted this, we only wanted peace." But peace had never been granted to humans easily, and history had proven that silence only lasted until someone decided to test the Terran resolve. Her officers lowered their heads, feeling the same ache inside their chests. This wasn't victory. This was a reminder of a war humanity buried deep in forgotten archives. A war so violent that Earth swore never to unleash weapons like Raven 01 again. But today, they had no choice. Today, the universe forced them to awaken an old nightmare. Meanwhile, in the shattered remains of the Sovereign flagship, a floating, broken chunk of metal barely holding itself together, a handful of Sovereign survivors crawled through the smoke-filled corridors, coughing, bleeding, their armor cracked, their pride shattered completely. They had never known defeat. They had never felt fear. They had never faced desperation. Until now. The once mighty Sovereign commander dragged his broken leg across the debris, his vision blurred with tears he didn't even know he could shed, his throat burning as he whispered, How could humans do this? How did they hide such power?" But deep down he already knew the answer. Humanity did not hide it out of cruelty. They hid it out of mercy. They never wanted anyone to see this side of them again. A young Sovereign officer collapsed beside him, trembling uncontrollably as he stared at the distant glow of Raven 01. We mocked them. We laughed at them. We thought they were weak," he cried, covering his face as shame tore through him like a blade. "And they still spared us. Because Raven 01 could have erased the survivors too, but it didn't. It simply turned away, drifting back toward human space with slow, painful dignity, like a giant carrying a burden heavier than any empire could understand." The Sovereign commander stared at the retreating warship through broken screens, tears running down his metallic cheeks as he whispered, "They were merciful. After everything we did, they showed mercy." And that truth hurt him more than any wound on his body. Far away, in hidden monitoring stations across the galaxy, other species who once feared the Sovereigns now feared something else. They feared the humans who destroyed them. But their fear wasn't rooted in hatred. It was rooted in awe, confusion, and a deep, overwhelming respect. They whispered among themselves, "How did we never know? How could they hide such strength? Why did they never use it before?" And as Raven 01 drifted deeper into the darkness, its runes fading, its engines dimming, its old wounds burning quietly across its hull, it sent one last encrypted message across human space, just 4 simple words, threat neutralized. Returning home. The galaxy trembled, not because humans had won, but because humans had chosen not to destroy everything in their path. They chose restraint. They chose control. They chose to stop the strongest empire in the universe and walk away. And in that moment, every species understood a terrifying and beautiful truth. Humanity was not dangerous because of their strength, but because of their heart. As Raven 01 drifted away from the battlefield, the silence in space felt heavier than the destruction it left behind. A silence filled not with victory but with sorrow. A deep, old sorrow that only ancient warriors carried in their bones. The Terran warship's engines glowed faintly, flickering like a dying heartbeat, its runes dimming slowly as if the ship itself was exhausted from reliving memories humanity had hoped to bury forever. Inside the bridge, the human captain stood alone for a moment, staring at the empty void where the Sovereign Empire once spread its shadow across countless galaxies, and her chest tightened with a weight she couldn't put into words. She didn't feel pride. She didn't feel triumph. She felt tired. So painfully tired. This wasn't a war humans wanted to win. This was a war they wanted to avoid, a fight they hoped would never come again. She remembered the old stories, the hidden archives locked away under Earth command. The War of the Void, the day humanity lost half its species fighting nightmares that fed on light and hope. The day they built the Raven-class ships not to dominate the universe, but to survive the universe when no one else could. And now, centuries later, they had been forced to awaken that old weapon again. Behind her, the bridge officers worked quietly, respectfully, their expressions weighed down by the same sadness. They didn't celebrate. They didn't smile. They simply watched their screens as distant starlight returned where the Sovereigns once ruled, and every flicker reminded them of what they had done to protect their home. Meanwhile, Across the galaxy, news spread like a cosmic storm. Planets that had once cowered under the sovereign's rule erupted in tears and festivals as they learned the empire was gone, erased by the very species everyone mocked as weak and harmless. Some civilizations wept in gratitude. Some bowed in reverence. Some stared in stunned silence. But none dared speak the human's name without respect again. Even the survivors on the shattered sovereign flagship, those broken officers who watched Raven 01 leave them alive, began sending distress calls across the galaxy, not for rescue, but with a simple warning. Never fight the humans. They don't show power until you force them to. Raven 01 moved deeper into human territory, its hull sparking, its ancient structure groaning softly from the strain of the battle. Medical teams rushed through cracked corridors, treating injured officers, helping each other stand, whispering comforting words to their wounded. Humanity helped its own quietly and gently, so different from the sovereigns, who would sacrifice millions without blinking. And this contrast, this heart, was what made humanity terrifying to its enemies. They were gentle until they were forced to draw blood. They were peaceful until someone threatened the weak. They were silent until someone pushed them too far. As the ship passed the final border gate into Terran space, the massive defense grid surrounding Earth lit up in recognition, welcoming Raven 01 home with soft blue lights that shimmered like stars bowing. A transmission opened automatically, and the voice of Earth command, calm, grateful, warm, filled the battered bridge. Raven 01. Earth hears your return. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. For the first time since the battle began, the captain allowed herself to breathe. Her eyes softened. Her shoulders loosened. She whispered, almost too quietly for her crew to hear, "We made it home." And at that same moment, millions of humans across colonies, stations, and ships stood still, listening to the broadcast that shook the galaxy. The sovereign empire was gone. Humanity had stopped them. A single Terran warship had done what endless galaxies could not. But Raven 01 didn't return as a conqueror. It returned as a guardian, a protector, a silent promise. And as Earth's blue glow appeared in the distance, a calm, beautiful light shining softly through space, the crew of Raven 01 felt tears rise in their eyes. They weren't returning with glory. They were returning with the simple truth humanity had carried since its earliest days. We do not fight because we want to, we fight because someone has to. And when Raven 01 finally entered orbit, battered but unbroken, the galaxy understood a lesson carved forever into the stars. Humanity's true power was never their weapons. It was their heart, their loyalty, and their refusal to let darkness win.